Good day everyone, Garage King here, and today we have a 2017 Hyundai Tucson. Now model years 2016 to 2021 should all be the same, pretty much, I would think so. This is a third generation Tucson, and you know what? It's in here for the front brakes. So wheels off, let's take a look here. You can see the pad is quite thin, so we're gonna take a closer look. So what we're gonna do for the brake job, we're gonna replace the front brake rotors as well. And you can see here, there's two set screws, number 2 Phillips, and you just wanna be careful removing those so you don't strip them. Once the wheel is off, you're gonna take your 14mm wrench and you're gonna loosen up and remove the 2 bolts that hold the caliper to the caliper bracket. Just give it a nice little wiggle like this and it will come free. Here is a top view, and let's maybe throw up an arrow with a magnifying glass and you can see, yeah, there is the brake pad, totally worn out. Good time to change it. So now we need a little bit bigger ratchet here. And you know what? To be honest, I forget what size. It's either a 15 or a 17. My bad on not taking note. You saw me with my fingers there. I just checked, just for the heck of it, the caliper slide pins, and they did move freely. So very excited about that. I won't have rusted up, seized in caliper slides. So very happy about that. A little bit of a love tap with the hammer, and we can take the rotor right off. Now once we're down to the bench, you can see here is the caliper and here are the sliders, and you can see I can actually move them, but just because I move them doesn't mean I should ignore them. It means I should still clean them and make sure that they are re-lubricated and reassembled. Far too often on these type of jobs, what happens is someone says, hey, they're okay, they can move a bit, and then they don't touch them, and then they cease before the second brake job is done. So you can see me here lubing them up. Now an important tip and something that's really important to do is one at a time. You can see I did the first one here. There's a bit of air pressure in there, and you can see I'll just sort of give it a push back and forth. There you go. You can see there's some air pressure, but with a little twisting and a little bit of effort, there you go. You can see me use my hand there. We can get it in. Now, if you took note of this pin, you noticed there was nothing on it. It was all steel. So let's remove this pin and see how it looks. And there you go. You can see this one actually has this rubber bushing on it. So make sure that they go in the same spot. And that's why I always like to do one at a time, because you just don't want to mix them up. Because there's a possibility if you mix them up, your pins may not slide as they're supposed to, and that could mean for uneven or premature brake wear. You can see here on the top, you can see the pin is actually sliding. I'm squeezing this little ball here, which puts a little bit of pressure on the piston. It just simulates brake fluid. And you can see it is necessary for the caliper to slide properly. You can see there it pulling the brake pads in. So those 2 pins, that's it. And the whole caliper moves back and forth. The piston pushes on the inner pad, and then the brake caliper moving is what pulls the outer pad against the rotor. So that's how the 2 brake pads get squished together, and that's how you stop. So very important to have those caliper pins lubed up properly. All right, so back to our regular scheduled programming. So you can see here, I'm doing the final pin there, nice and lubed up. Just gonna push it in. Again, just like the first one, you can see there's a little bit of air resistance there. Just gonna use my hand, push it in. Now make sure when you're pushing it in, I find it handy just to pull the rubber boot back just a little bit with my fingers, and this lets any air escape. There you can see, perfect, just like that. Now this one was fairly clean, but if it's not, use a proper brake file and knock off any excess rust. That is very important, and the whole reason for that is for this step right here. Once these clips go in, just like this, sometimes they don't always seat properly, and if they don't seat properly, your pads are going to be very tight. You can see there's no gap. They are fully seated right there. That's how they're supposed to look. If they're not fully seated, well, let's just say you're probably going to be doing your brake job again very soon, because the pads are going to be stiff. They're not going to retract or come back, and then they're going to generate a lot of heat and they're going to wear out fast. So you just don't want that happening. So anyway, quick little tip. So here you can see I'm actually installing the brake pads, and make sure that you install them the right way. So on these particular ones, the indicator that hits the rotor is on the inner pad. And just if anyone's curious, there's the part number of the Raybestos pads that I did in fact use. Now, the other thing you gotta be a little bit careful with these ones is you can see there's a spring that goes on the top and the bottom. Now this spring applies a little bit of pressure, so once you put the spring in, you kind of have to hold the pads, or what can happen is it can sort of just throw them out of the caliper and they can sort of just pop out. So just something to take note of, and believe me, if you forget, you're going to realize very quickly. Now there again, old pad to new pad, you can see quite the difference. Now here's an important part of the brake job that a lot of people overlook, and that is pushing the piston back in. I use this special tool. It really doesn't cost a lot of money. This tool's rather cheap. I'll put a link in the description. And the best thing is, you know, you're pushing the piston back in squarely. And sometimes these calipers, you know, the pistons are kind of stiff going back in. And if you use a big pair of pliers, now I admit I have done so in the past in a jam. Well, that's not the, you know, best way to do it. It does work at times, but at the same time, you know, you don't want to damage anything by pushing the piston in on an angle. So it's just best to do it this way. You know, I bought one of these tools years ago. I absolutely love it and haven't used pliers since. So enough said about that. Next things, what we're going to do is just clean the rotor hub a little bit. You can see I just used a wire brush there just to knock off any excess rust. And now I'm just putting anti-seize here just so the rotor will not, you know, rust onto the hub. We definitely don't want that. If you took note from earlier, you will remember there was 2 set screws. Well, you know what? We're going to put those same set screws back in. So we're going to put a little bit of anti-seize on them, and then we're just going to thread them in by hand. I like to assemble everything by hand because this way I know I'm not cross-threading anything. And now you can see me just snugging them up. These really do not have to be tight at all. These serve no functional purpose other than to align the rotor during assembly. That is it. So there you go. You can see I have some anti-stop squeal I placed on the pads, and that should help us hopefully have a nice quiet braking. We don't want brake squeal. So hopefully it works, and I find this stuff generally does work pretty good. So now it's a matter of wiggling the caliper bracket back on without having the pads pop out. You definitely don't want that. The pads are playing nice right now, so we'll see if they continue to play nice throughout the rest of the assembly. So now what we're gonna do is just put our bigger bolts in, give them a good snug up, and we have the caliper. We're gonna line it up there. And just take note, usually when you're lining them up, you have to just push the slider pins in a little bit because they're gonna stick out a little bit. But that is really not a big deal. They'll flex in and out. Then what you do is you take your 2 14 mil bolts, put them in by hand, and tighten them up. Lastly, what you're gonna do after that is you're going to put on the tire, and please remember, before you back up, make sure you pump the pedal, make sure you do have a pedal or you will be hitting something. Hopefully it's nothing more than someone's blue box, because since you've pushed the pads in all the way, there is clearance. And now when you step on the brake for the first time, you are going to be taking up that clearance. So very, very important to put your foot on the brake, pump up the pedal, and make sure that you actually have brakes before you back up, because you don't want, like I said earlier, you don't want to be backing into anyone. Anyway, that is it for the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, anything like that, please leave them in the comments below. I do check my comments regularly and do my best to answer all the comments. Other than that, what more can I say? A job done. That's it. Garage King over and out, and I hope to see you next week.